Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to look at 4 scenarios for factoring trinomials. Let's look at the first one. So this is a trinomial because you have 1, 2, 3 terms. The word tri implies 3. So what we want to do is we want to try to factor this back into 2 binomials. So let's look at this logically. Our trinomial has all plus signs in it. Even this x squared is assumed to be positive. So if there's all plus signs in my trinomial, there is no doubt that the signs of my 2 binomials have to be pluses. So now the first term here, notice there's no number on here. If there's a leading number such as a 2 where we can't factor it off, say you had a 2 here, then you'd have to use factor by grouping, which we're going to discuss in another video. So here there's no number in front other than an assumed 1, so you could use this type of logic. Alright, so the f part of the FOIL method, which makes up these terms here, creates this first term. So all we simply have to do is just evenly divide up x squared into x to the first and x to the first. So now this last term here, or the set of last terms here, they do double duty. What they do is when they multiply together, they give you this third term, and when they add or subtract together based on what these signs are, they give you this middle term. So you ask a riddle. You say, what 2 numbers, when multiplied together, will give me this last term of 4, but when added or subtracted together will give me this middle term of 5. So we could break down 4 into 4 times 1 or 2 times 2. Which one, now both of them give you 4 when multiplied, but which one will add or subtract to give you 5? And that's this top one here. 4 times 1 is 4, 4 plus 1 is 5. Now because I have 2 pluses, it really does not matter where we put the 4 and where we put the 1. That's scenario 1. Let's take a look at scenario 2, which is a sibling, I would say, to this type of problem. So I have x squared minus 6x plus 8. Now on a side note, there may be times where you have to utilize a couple different methods of factoring. For instance, if I had 2x squared minus 12x plus 16. Well, we could look to see what's common between all 3 terms. In that case, a 2. I could factor out a 2 and I'm left with x squared minus 6x plus 8. And then from there, we could break this down into 2 binomials, which is what we're doing right here. So our first terms will break down into x and x because the f part of the FOIL method creates this first term here of x squared. So now we said that the third term here comes from the multiplication of these last 2 terms here. However, the sign on the middle term is minus. Well, there are 2 ways to get a net positive answer when multiplying by 2 numbers. One is if you have a plus times a plus, or a minus times a minus. Well, a plus and a plus is used when your trinomial is all pluses. Since the middle term is minus, we have to use minus and minus. So now we ask the riddle. We say, what 2 numbers when multiplied together will give me 8? When added or subtracted together will give me 6. Well, let's see what the factors of 8 are. 8 times 1 or 4 times 2. 8 times 1 doesn't add or subtract to give us 6, but 4 times 2 does. Now, since I have 2 minus signs, this basically becomes an addition type problem. When you take the outside terms and inside terms, they'll add up to minus 6 through subtraction. So we end up with x minus 4 times x minus 2. Let us take a look at scenario 3. And we'll look at the sibling to this problem. All right, so let's see how to handle these last two scenarios. For this one right here, I have x to the fourth minus 2x squared minus 15. So we're going to assume that we could break this down into two binomials. Now, not all trinomials are easily broken down like we're showing here in these examples. There's times where they just can't factor nicely into two binomials. In that case, what we would have to do is we would have to do one of two methods, completing the square or the quadratic formula, which will be covered in a later lecture video. So let's go over this. X to the fourth will divvy up among our first term as x squared and x squared. Now notice that the third term is minus 15. This comes from the multiplication of these last two numbers. So there's only one way to net a minus value when multiplying two numbers, and that's a minus times a plus or vice versa. So now we have that figured out. Now we ask the riddle. We say what two numbers when multiplied together will give me 15. When added or subtracted together will give me 2. So we look at all the factors. 15 times 1, 5 times 3. 15 and 1 doesn't work, but 5 minus 3 will give me 2. So this is it, 5 and 3. Now the question is, where does the 5 go and where does the 3 go? Well, we look at the sign of the middle term. The sign of the middle term is minus. The larger of the two factors have to match the sign of the middle term. So since the larger of our two factors here is 5, the 5 has to go with the minus and the 3 goes with the plus. And once again, you could always check all of these answers, factoring answers, just by simplifying them to make sure you get right back to your original problem. So let's look at this last one here. It's the same exact idea, except it's going to be reversed. Now this x on the middle term is assumed to be 1. So now our x squared will divvy into x and x. We have a sign on our minus sign on our third term. The only way to get that is a minus times a plus of the last terms. So now we ask the riddle. We say what two numbers when multiplied together will give me 6, when added or subtracted will give me 1. Well, the factors are 6 times 1 or 3 times 2. 6 and 1 is out because you can't add them or subtract them to get a 1, but 3 and 2 you can. Now the question is, where does the 3 go? Where does the 2 go? The larger of the two factors in this case, which is a 3, has to match the sign of the middle term, which in this case is positive. So the 3 goes with the positive, the 2 goes with the minus. And that concludes our 4 scenarios of factoring a trinomial. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.